Okay, ladies and gents, welcome to week 2 of the new routine. We're continuing with 4.1. Maybe we'll finish this week. Um, this is today's work, I guess. First of all, you've hopefully just completed the starter. You've taken 10 minutes to read through here, which I have right up for us. And here brings you to the UN website and shows you the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, Sustainable Development Goal number 4 is all about clean water and sanitation. And this first task hoped to put a bit of today's work into perspective. Hopefully you guys had a read through of here and here and there. These links are going to be very useful to you in 4.2, where we look at a case study of water scarcity and we look at case studies of water management, both in agriculture and in an urban setting. Also, I hope you guys didn't miss that you can click on the infographics right here. Number 1, just a quick point. Practice open defecation means that these people don't have access to bathrooms, they don't have access to toilets, therefore they find a place and they go to the bathroom there. Hopefully outside of an urban settlement, but it can be that this refers to an open sewer which people simply squat over. We also could have found some nice information right here. If we haven't seen these, I'd recommend that you check them out before we go any further. They'll help you to give maybe slightly better answers to the starter question. Now, we move on to main activity part 1, and you guys can see that there are some terms that you need to define. I'm going to cover at least a few of them in the PowerPoint, and in order that you guys don't need to miss out on this, I thought it might be nice to record the PowerPoint and you guys can watch it through as we go. We just started with the fact that 20%, 1 in 5 of the world's population, lacks access to safe drinking water. And some headline figures in a population of 7.7 billion, give or take, is that 1.1 billion people globally don't have access to improved water supply sources, and 2.4 do not have access to any type of improved sanitation facility. So we're talking improved water supply source is a supply of clean, safe water that they're able to access on a regular basis. And improved sanitation facilities, we're basically talking about bathrooms, toilets, showers, sinks, taps, dedicated to keeping things clean. Now, we're going to use a lot of terms which kind of feel general knowledge or feel kind of not too specific. Let's meet them now. We're going to talk about drinking water. Now, drinking water is one of those misleading terms. Drinking water is water that's used for domestic purposes, including drinking, cooking, and personal hygiene. So the amount of water that you have access to when you talk about your drinking water, I did air quotes just then for drinking water. This is what you drink, but also if you're making rice or you're making pasta or whatever it might be, then the water you need to cook stuff in, if you're going to boil your veggies, for instance, but also personal hygiene, to brush your teeth, to wash and to keep clean. Now, obviously, drinking water, well, you need to drink it, stay alive. You guys are aware of that, given how much we love doppers, etc. Cooking, it kind of goes without saying. Let's bear in mind as well that when we're talking about cooking in this situation, we're really talking about cooking things that you've grown, basically, or things that you bought from a market. We're not in a sort of a processed food. We're not really in much of a purchasing processed food market when we talk about access to safe drinking water in developing countries and less economically developed countries. If we have access to it, well, that means that the source of water is less than 1 kilometre away from the place that it's to be used, and it's possible to obtain 20 litres per person per day. So in our household, for instance, then maybe if the tap was in the bus station in Hausen, it would be close enough, and I would need to be able to get 60 litres on a daily basis, 20 for me, 20 for my wife, and 20 for my son. You guys can imagine that's not a gigantic amount of water, it's 12 toilet flushes. If we skip back, 1.1 billion people do not have access to improved water supply sources. That means for these 1.1 billion, either that water is more than 1 kilometre away, or they're unable reliably to obtain 20 litres per person per day. And, by all means, pause the video, go and get a litre of milk out of the fridge, 20 of those. Finally, if we talk about access to safe drinking water is water with bacterial, chemical, and physical characteristics that meet the WHO, the World Health Organization guidelines, or national standards for drinking water quality. So there can't be bacteria in it that are going to make you sick. There can't be chemicals in it that are going to poison you. And physical characteristics means that it can't have too much sediment in it. It can't have too many sort of like bits of stuff kind of floating around. If we have a look at the water in the picture, it's clear. It's not clear. If you look inside of the bowl that's been used to collect, you can see it has that yellowish sort of brownish hue to it. It's not necessarily bacteria. It's not necessarily chemicals. It could just be little floating bits of soil. But the World Health Organization sets out its own kind of physical standards for how that water needs to look and appear and behave. Now, when we look at access to safe drinking water, we can see that it's a problem that is kind of it's a problem which is not specific to the entire world. Almost the entire of the Northern Hemisphere, if we put an equator through, let's say here-ish, reason I'm not a geography teacher, then you can see that the majority of the countries above the equator are dark blue, or kind of medium dark blue. They're these kind of 91 to 100%. Yeah, obviously it's the entire of Western Europe, the entire of North America, the vast majority of South America. Not because everyone's stonkingly rich there, but because it rains plenty, amongst other things. Australia, not that it rains a massive amount, but that they're wealthy enough to move it around and treat it and extract it from the sea with desalination plants, etc. We'll go on to those later in the unit. We can see primarily this is an African problem. It's primarily a sub-Saharan African problem, with the exception of the southern tip of Africa. We can see these red countries are countries where under 50% of the population has access to safe drinking water. Now, we would say then that these people are experiencing water scarcity. In some cases, people experience physical water scarcity. So physical water scarcity occurs in places where the demand for water exceeds the supply. It's most common in arid, aka dry, or semi-arid, bit dry areas where rainfall is low and where river flow fluctuates. So if we think about this from a systems diagram point of view, we're looking at a place which has uncertain inputs of water and potentially high outputs of water. If we flip back to the map, hopefully we can picture this, right? We've all seen enough nature documentaries to know that we're looking at places with seasonal rains, where rain is present for part of the year and it's dry for the remainder, where rivers and lakes dry up over the course of the year, and where rain may come one year but not the next, and not the next after that. We can, however, also consider economic water scarcity. And people who experience economic water scarcity may have water close to them physically, but they may not be able to afford to buy it. Now, this is typically a problem where we have social inequality, where we have economic inequality within society. There are some good examples of this around the world. If you think about maybe some Gulf states, maybe some of the Emirates, where you may have a significant proportion of the population which is very wealthy and a significant proportion of the population which is not so wealthy. This is also something which is common in emerging economies. So maybe in India, in China, in Mexico, in Brazil, these might be countries where part of the population might, for instance, buy bottled water, might only brush their teeth with bottled water, where they might only cook their food, they might only boil their rice and their noodles or whatever in bottled water, they might only boil their potatoes in bottled water, they might only cook their veggies in bottled water. And maybe you guys have lived in or been to countries that are like this. Now, if we look at a map of the world, and this is a much better image, you guys can see a source for it hopefully at the bottom. We have a tighter definition of physical water scarcity, of economic water scarcity, and little to no water scarcity. What I find nice as well is that this really actually looks at regions within countries. Australia is also really, really interesting from a water scarcity point of view. We can see here in the southeast corner, we have physical water scarcity, and yet here around the remainder of the coastline, we have little to no water scarcity. It's not estimated for the interior, because there's very little point, because it's incredibly dry. If we look across the remainder of the world, we can see our sub-Saharan African problem of water scarcity is labelled as an economic water scarcity problem, with in fact North African and Middle Eastern problem more being physical water scarcity. It's surprising to look left at the United States and to see there a little more nuanced in our southwestern corner that we have an issue of physical water scarcity. And the southwest of the United States of America, specifically California, makes a very interesting case study. Now we're going to, in the second part of today's class, after you've been through and done your definitions and your reading, we're going to be having a look at how water usage and how water availability has changed over time. We have some historic data that you guys can work on, but to think about, being in a moment and moving forwards, then we have here some factors that might affect future water use. And obviously, if you're in the past, then they have affected the water use today. As populations grow and urbanization takes place, then the amount of water used typically increases. When economic development occurs and people move from extensive to intensive farming, when people move to consuming more, when people move to having a larger, more industrial agricultural sector, then economic development can drive changes in water use. Climate change obviously as well, because we can't only think, well, how does the amount of water that we use as a society, how does that affect the amount of water that's present? We also have to think about the input. Where does it come from? If rain and snowfall patterns change, if ice caps melt on mountains at different times of the year, as sea level rises, putting freshwater sources at risk, then the access that societies have to fresh water also changes. And finally, public attitudes about water can make a difference. If a public can become aware that you have a scarcity problem, then the public can become aware of how they might help to deal with that scarcity problem. Now, what I'd like you to do at this point is I would like you to go back to the main activity part 1. You've watched the video, congratulations, you stuck with it. Not that it was thrilling, I'm sure. And I would like you to define these terms and to finish your reading of topic 4.1 on cognitive. We think that's more or less one period's worth of work. Maybe it's a little bit more, maybe it's a little bit less. Let us know. And for the rest, I'll see you in the linked video in main activity part 2. Deeply exciting.